The team of scientists had been working for months, excavating and analyzing remains from a battlefield that no one had remembered for centuries. It was an ancient war, long forgotten by history, with only scattered clues and half-destroyed records left behind. One soldier's body, remarkably preserved, was found buried deep within a crypt. The preservation was so perfect that it seemed as though the man could have been alive just yesterday. But the body was decades old, perhaps even older. As they carefully transported the soldier's remains back to their lab, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. This was no ordinary find. They had already uncovered the bodies of several other soldiers, but nothing had been as well preserved as this one. This soldier seemed to hold a secret. The body was placed in a sterile chamber, and the team set up their equipment around it. The scientist leading the project, Dr. Evelyn Marks, had a feeling that there was more to this discovery than met the eye. She wasn't sure why, but she felt compelled to examine this soldier more closely. It wasn't just the preservation, it was the soldier's uniform, the way his body seemed almost too well kept. It suggested that this soldier wasn't a simple casualty of war. He might have been part of something far more advanced than anything they had encountered before. Dr. Marks had an idea. "Let's try something different," she suggested. "Let's place a small camera inside the coffin. Maybe we can find something the human eye missed." The team agreed, and after carefully preparing the equipment, the camera was inserted into the soldier's casket. It was a decision that would change everything. They activated the camera, and as they began reviewing the footage, everything seemed normal at first. The body lay motionless, just as they expected. But as the hours passed and the footage continued, they started to notice something strange. The footage from the camera continued to play on the monitors. At first there was nothing unusual. The soldier's body remained still, the way it should, given its state of preservation. But as the team watched closely, something began to change. At first it was subtle, a faint twitch, almost imperceptible. Dr. Marks leaned closer to the screen, her brow furrowing. The twitching continued, slow and deliberate, as if the soldier's body was responding to something. But there was no external stimulus, no air currents, no sudden movements, just the quiet hum of their equipment. "It's impossible," muttered one of the younger researchers, Alan, who was still new to this kind of work. "The body shouldn't be moving like this. The preservation should have kept it perfectly still." Dr. Marks held up a hand, signaling for everyone to quiet down. She needed to focus. She replayed the footage, slowing it down frame by frame, trying to make sense of what was happening. The soldier's fingers twitched, then his eyes shifted ever so slightly under his eyelids. "This can't be right," Dr. Marks whispered, her voice steady but filled with confusion. "There's no way the body should be responding like this." The team watched in stunned silence as the movements became more pronounced. The soldier's chest seemed to rise and fall faintly, like a slow, almost imperceptible breath. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make everyone question what they thought they knew about death and preservation. One of the other scientists, Dr. Patel, began tapping frantically at his keyboard, running scans on the body's internal temperature, the environmental conditions in the lab, and any possible malfunctions in the equipment. Everything checked out. There was no explanation for what they were seeing. "What if it's something more?" Alan suggested nervously. "I mean, what if this soldier is somehow still alive?" The room fell silent as the possibility hung in the air. Alive. How could that be? The soldier had been dead for decades. The body was frozen in time, preserved by unknown methods, and yet here it was, moving, breathing, responding to stimuli in ways that made no sense. Dr. Marks knew they had to dig deeper. She instructed Alan to run a more detailed scan of the soldier's brain activity. Even if the body was preserved, it didn't explain the movement. Perhaps there was a different answer. But nothing could have prepared them for what the scan revealed next. The scan results were nothing short of shocking. Dr. Marks stared at the screen in disbelief. The brain scans showed unusual activity. The soldier's brain was dead, of course, in the traditional sense, but the scan revealed sporadic electrical activity. It was as if the brain was still firing, still sending signals, even though the body was long past any hope of revival. "We've never seen anything like this," Dr. Marks said, her voice trembling. She quickly analyzed the data again, convinced that there must have been a mistake. But the scan results were clear. The soldier's brain, though mostly inactive, was showing signs of consciousness. "We need to take a closer look," Dr. Patel said, his eyes widening. He was the first to suggest that they might be dealing with something far more complex than simple preservation. As the team continued to pore over the data, one of the technicians, Samantha, noticed something else. A series of strange, almost imperceptible patterns hidden within the footage from the camera inside the coffin. They were too faint to be seen at first glance, but upon closer inspection, they appeared to be symbols, an intricate code embedded in the structure of the soldier's coffin. "Wait, look at this," Samantha said, zooming in on one of the symbols. "These aren't just scratches, they're deliberate. This could be a message." Dr. Marks approached the screen and examined the symbols closely. They looked like nothing she had ever seen before, each symbol more complex than the last. As they decoded the first few, they realized something staggering. The symbols formed coordinates, encrypted messages, and a clear warning. "It's a map," Dr. Marks whispered. The realization hit her hard. This was not just a soldier who had died and been forgotten by time. This soldier had been part of something much larger, something secret. A hidden message locked away in this coffin had survived for decades, waiting for someone to find it. The coordinates pointed to a remote location, far away from where the soldier had been found. But that wasn't all. The encrypted message was far more chilling. It read, "They are coming. The experiment is not over. The next phase begins soon." The room fell quiet as everyone digested the meaning behind the message. The soldier, it seemed, had been part of a covert military operation, an experiment that wasn't just about preserving bodies but about something much more sinister, something involving advanced technology, human minds, and the manipulation of life itself. Dr. Marks quickly made the connection. She had heard rumors, whispers of a program designed to merge human consciousness with machines, creating super soldiers who could fight without the limitations of the human body, but she had always thought it was just a conspiracy theory. Now, it was clear that the rumors were true. The soldier wasn't just a casualty of war, he was a test subject, and whatever had been done to him was far beyond anything they had ever imagined. The message on the screen, the coordinates, the warning, they all pointed to something terrifying. The team of scientists, now united by their fear and curiosity, gathered around as Dr. Marks began to connect the dots. The soldier wasn't just an ordinary person from an ancient war. He had been part of a covert government-backed experiment to transfer human consciousness into a preserved body, merging the mind with technology to create the ultimate super soldier. But the real question now was, what happened to him? The message suggested that the experiment hadn't ended, that there were more subjects like him out there, soldiers whose minds had been trapped within their own bodies, lost in a state of limbo. Dr. Marks carefully reviewed the footage from the camera again, hoping to find more clues. As she watched, something else caught her attention. The soldier's eyes, slightly open now, were moving, following the camera. It was subtle but undeniable. It was as if he could sense their presence. "Is it possible?" Alan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Can a consciousness survive like that, trapped in a body for so long?" Dr. Marks wasn't sure. She had read about theoretical experiments in mind transference, but they were still just that, theories. What she was seeing, however, was not theory. This soldier's consciousness had somehow endured, preserved within his body. But how? Then it hit her. She recalled the strange energy readings from earlier, the subtle electrical activity in the soldier's brain that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't just the body reacting to external stimuli. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous. The soldier's mind was still alive, just trapped. The government had somehow succeeded in transferring consciousness into an artificial state, using the preserved body as a vessel. But something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. Instead of a seamless integration of mind and machine, the soldier's consciousness had been locked in place, unable to move or escape. He was aware but incapable of communicating, forced to live in a nightmare of his own making. "The soldier is still there," Dr. Marks said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's still conscious, still trapped inside his own body." The team sat in stunned silence. This was no longer just an archaeological find. It was the discovery of a new kind of life, one that blurred the lines between man, machine, and something else entirely. The soldier was no longer just a victim of war. He was the product of a dangerous and illegal experiment, one that it seemed was still ongoing. But as Dr. Marks continued to study the footage, she noticed something even more unsettling. The soldier's eyes, which had once moved in subtle shifts, were now focused, as if he were looking directly at the camera. His expression was unchanged, but there was a strange intensity in his gaze. Dr. Marks leaned in closer to the screen, her heart racing. Could it be possible that the soldier was trying to communicate with them? Was he reaching out in some way, trying to warn them about something? The camera inside the coffin continued to record, and the soldier's body remained motionless save for the occasional twitch. But in that stillness, something profound was happening. The mind inside the soldier's body had awakened, and it was reaching out, perhaps for the first time in decades, to make contact. The footage from the camera continued to play, but now each frame felt heavier, as if they were peering into something forbidden. The soldier's eyes, now fully opened, stared directly into the lens. It was as if he could see them, feel them. And that realization sent a chill through Dr. Marks and her team. Suddenly something unexpected happened. The camera inside the coffin, which had been steadily recording the soldier's unchanging form, began to glitch. The images on the screen distorted, flickered, and then steadied, showing the soldier's face once again, but this time the movements were different. His lips twitched, almost imperceptibly at first. Then, slowly, they began to form words. It wasn't a loud, audible voice. Instead, it was a series of faint whispers, almost like a soft hum coming from the soldier's lips. But somehow, it was clear enough to hear. "They are coming." The words were broken, barely audible, but clear enough to send a wave of unease through the lab. Dr. Marks froze. Did anyone else hear that?" she asked, her voice shaky, her eyes locked on the screen. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination, the glitching camera, or something real, but the words were unmistakable. Alan, wide-eyed, was the first to respond. "I heard it. It said, 'They are coming.' What does that mean?" The team scrambled to replay the footage, slowing it down to try and capture every detail. As the camera zoomed in, the soldier's lips moved again. This time the words were clearer. "The experiment is not over. The next phase begins soon." The room fell silent as the implications of the message began to sink in. The soldier wasn't just trying to communicate. He was warning them about something far worse than they had imagined. Dr. Marks's mind raced. She had thought the soldier's mind was trapped, unable to interact. But this message made it clear that there was more at play here. The soldier was fully aware, his consciousness still active within the preserved body. And if he was speaking, it meant he had access to more than just memories. He knew what had happened, what was going to happen, and perhaps most terrifyingly, he knew who was behind it all. "Who is coming?" Alan asked, his voice trembling now. Dr. Marks felt a wave of dread wash over her. I think it's not just him. There were others. This soldier was part of an experiment, a project that was supposed to create super soldiers, soldiers whose minds were integrated with machines. But something went wrong, or maybe it didn't. The team looked at her, confused, as the weight of her words hung in the air. She continued, her thoughts coming faster now, as she pieced together the fragments of information they had gathered. The government didn't just stop the program, they hid it. They kept it going in secret, and they weren't just creating one soldier. They were creating an army of soldiers whose minds were merged with machines. This soldier, this man, he's one of them. The revelation was almost too much to bear. The project, the conspiracy, the experiments, they were all real. And now, after decades of being hidden away, it was about to begin again. "We have to stop it," Dr. Marks said, her voice barely audible. "Whatever they're planning, we have to stop it before it's too late." But as the team began to process the reality of what they had uncovered, another disturbing thought surfaced. The soldier's message wasn't just a warning about the past. It was a warning about the present. The next phase was imminent. Whatever had been set in motion decades ago was now on the verge of happening again. The soldier's mind had been alive all along, and now he was reaching out for help. But was it too late? The weight of their discovery settled heavily on the team, but there was no time for hesitation. The soldier's warning made one thing clear. The project, the dangerous experiment they had uncovered, was not only still alive, but about to begin its next phase. Whatever had been hidden away in the shadows for decades was now close to coming to fruition, and the team had to act quickly to stop it. Dr. Marks rushed to her desk, typing furiously on her computer, pulling up every piece of information she could find on the mysterious military program. She scrolled through government archives, old classified documents, and any available data. What she found was unsettling. The project had never been officially shut down. Instead, it had been buried under layers of secrecy. The soldiers who had been part of the program, like the one they had just uncovered, were meant to be the beginning. The next phase was always planned. An army of super soldiers who would be controlled by artificial intelligence. Soldiers who could think and adapt faster than any human could. But something had gone wrong during the first test. The minds of the soldiers had been trapped inside their bodies, unable to escape, their consciousness forced to linger in a digital prison. The experiments were deemed a failure, but no one had realized that the minds of these soldiers were still alive. Now, decades later, the project was set to continue. Except this time, the technology had advanced. The soldiers would no longer be simple test subjects. They would be weaponized, a new generation of super soldiers, ready to carry out missions with no regard for human limits. "What do we do?" Alan asked, his voice thick with anxiety. "How do we stop something that's already been in motion for so long?" Dr. Marks didn't have the answer, but she knew one thing for certain. They couldn't just sit back and let this happen. If the soldier they had discovered was any indication, the project was already farther along than they thought. The warning he had given them wasn't just about what had happened in the past. It was about what was coming. The next phase of the experiment was nearly here, and if the military succeeded this time, there would be no stopping them. The team quickly worked together, pooling their resources to find out where the next phase would take place. Using the coordinates from the soldier's message, they traced them back to a remote research facility in a desert region. The facility was located in an isolated part of the country, shielded by miles of uninhabited land. But the more they dug into the records, the more they realized that the place was still operational, still funded, and, most troubling of all, still under strict secrecy. "We need to get there," Dr. Mark said, standing up abruptly. "We have to stop them before they finish what they started." The team packed up their equipment and prepared for the journey. They couldn't waste any more time. They knew the risk they were taking. If the government found out they had uncovered the project's existence, they'd never make it out alive. But the alternative was even worse. If they didn't act, the world could soon be facing an army of mind-controlled soldiers who were nothing more than machines with human memories. As they drove toward the facility, Dr. Marks's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were too late, that the project was already in its final stages. But they had to try. The soldier, whose consciousness had been locked inside a body for decades, had warned them for a reason, and she wasn't about to let that warning go unanswered. The journey to the remote research facility was long, tense and filled with uncertainty. As Dr. Marks and her team approached the facility, a sense of dread hung over them. The coordinates from the soldier's message had led them here, to a place that was off the radar, hidden in plain sight. It was evident that no one was meant to know about it, let alone discover the horrors that were happening inside. When they arrived, the facility appeared quiet and abandoned. There were no signs of life, no guards, no activity. It looked almost as if the place had been deserted long ago. But Dr. Marks knew better. This was the final stage of the experiment. And if what the soldier had said was true, they were about to walk straight into a nightmare. The team moved cautiously through the facility, using the information they had gathered to guide them. As they entered the main research wing, they found rows of empty cells, each one meticulously preserved and ready for the next phase. The air felt sterile, cold, as if the building itself had been waiting for something, some event, to kickstart the dark project once more. But then they found it. Deep within the facility, locked behind thick security doors, was a central lab. Inside, the scene was like something out of a science fiction horror story. It was a vast, high-tech room filled with monitors, machines, and glass pods. And inside the pods were more soldiers just like the one they had discovered. A group of men and women, all preserved, all with the same eerie, lifeless eyes, just waiting for something to bring them to life. Dr. Marks stared at the scene in disbelief. This wasn't just an experiment, it was an entire operation, an army in the making. The soldiers inside these pods were not merely preserved bodies. They were still alive, trapped in their own minds, just like the one they had uncovered. The technology had advanced, and now the minds of these soldiers could be fully integrated with machines. No longer bound by their bodies, but part of an army of unfeeling, unstoppable warriors. "It's worse than we thought," Alan whispered, his voice filled with shock. "They were planning on creating an army, and now they're ready." Dr. Marks moved forward, her mind racing. The pods, the soldiers, the technology, it was all set in motion. The final phase of the project was here, and they had walked right into the heart of it. She could hear the faint hum of machines whirring to life, as if they were being activated, as if the soldiers inside the pods were waking up. "We can't stop them," Dr. Marks said, almost in a daze. "It's already happening. They're about to release them." But just as she spoke, the monitors flickered, and a voice echoed throughout the lab. It wasn't a human voice, it was mechanical, cold and precise. "Phase 2 initiated. Prepare for deployment." The team froze, realizing the worst possible truth. The soldiers in the pods were no longer prisoners of their own minds. They were ready for action. They were the first of a new breed of soldier, soldiers who had no emotion, no hesitation, no humanity left in them. And as the voice on the monitor continued to speak, they realized that the government had succeeded. The project was not only alive, it was unstoppable. "We have to destroy it," Dr. Marks said, her voice filled with resolve. The team had no choice. They had come this far, and they couldn't let these soldiers be unleashed on the world. But as they rushed to the control panel to disable the system, the soldiers in the pods began to stir. The sound of metal and wires whirring to life echoed through the facility. It was too late.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.